the show, everybody. Today, I get to talk with a very awesome NFT archaeologist who has brought two different projects back to life and continually showcases different projects, NFT or not, that pertains to just crypto history, which is quite interesting. I'm here with Jeremiah Long. He recently brought back EtherID, and for those that remember, EtherID was created in 2015. Came right after Ethereum. It's one of the early name services that has quite an interesting prospect of technology to it. He also brought back Immortal Player Characters, which at one point surpassed Bored Apes in sales volume during that day. What a crazy time that was. So Jeremiah, thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so excited to be on and just be talking about these things, and also be talking to you, Jake, because you've been doing a lot of really great work in the space as well, and cataloging, NFT history and putting it into a way that people can access it through visuals and through written word. And yeah, I really appreciate the work you're doing, putting everything together, especially your NFT calendars of rediscovery. That's been some great stuff, and I've been using it as a reference point when I talk to people in real life here in Atlanta.
Right, it's quite interesting, the historical NFT community. Many of us began documenting the tokens. Didn't start with Mooncats, but that was the big aha moment for everybody. I like to focus on documenting the culture, because as we know, and you found yourself kind of right in the middle of the controversy, that the culture can be quite divisive, but also quite communicative. It's a community that's based off of semantics, right? My historical thesis is better than your historical thesis, kind of idea, which is quite funny. But regarding you kind of came out of nowhere. I'm not gonna lie, right? You brought back Immortal Player Characters. I think was back in like April. I believe it was like April of this year. You said you had been mentioning it, or you had been looking into it for quite a long time. So let's stay on the idea of culture and tell us a little bit of who Jeremiah Long was. I know you'd probably been in this space for a little while, but with that rediscovery, man, I didn't know who you were. Many of us were really caught off guard because the project wasn't brought back by your typical NFT archaeologist.
Yeah, it's an interesting path for myself. I've been in cryptocurrency since probably 2018, I guess, is when I really started putting some focus into it. Didn't really get into NFTs themselves until 2020, but still was just more focused as an artist and a technology lover on making NFTs. I had no real interest in 2020 in collecting NFTs for the most part. And so I was, experimenting with the technologies and everything. And then 2021, when things really got off to the races early on, I was a big fan of things like hash masks and some other, projects that were coming out. And, I really started to get into the idea of finding out about the history of NFTs when I had heard the idea continuously floated around that CryptoPunks was the first NFT. And I got the idea behind why people felt like that, because it broke so many barriers. It's 10K, randomly generated, avatar project, a lot of the things that people really felt were important parts of the cultural part of building a community. Those things were very much responsible with, through CryptoPunks. But, I'm an advanced Googler. I love to, to do research. I love to, find out, interesting pieces of information. So when I started doing my research, I was like, I'd heard of some other things besides this already. And I started digging around. I was like, Rare Pepes was way before that from what I'd remembered. And so I started looking around. I was like, no, there's actually a whole culture of NFTs that have come and gone and come again over the bull and the bear markets, that have, grown and are still vibrant. And I started following some specific accounts that were into counterparty NFTs. And that was kind of when I really started down my own rabbit hole of the historical community. And that was probably in March or April of 2021. And so then around that time was also when the Mooncats rediscovery happened. I did not mint from contract from the Mooncats. I did eventually grab a Mooncat. But I really started to understand that if I wanted to really understand what was going on with this, I should just dig around on Etherscan and just dig around in the community and then dig around in the various discords and the various communities of people who are really interested in these things. And that was when I found my first real heart of the community that I love, besides just the art side, which the art side is where I really entered from, was the idea that there are all these micro communities. I think the best way that I've heard it termed is minimum viable communities. These minimum viable communities that are thriving around these small projects. And so yeah, I got really just deep in that space, just digging around through Etherscan. And then I think my first big archaeological, win was the night in Adam McBride's NFT Archaeology Discord, when somebody dropped 30 test tokens into a dispenser on Counterparty. And I'm furiously over here trying to figure out how to get the funds moved around into my free wallet and try to obtain one of these. I went to go obtain two, and then I had this like feeling in my heart of, no, there's only 30 and this is moving fairly slow. It should have good distribution. And, I definitely wish I would have gotten two test tokens now instead of just one, but I did get a test token. And that was the real community that really I felt, really sucked me into the whole idea of NFT archaeology, was because there's a private community just for people who are test holders, on Discord and on Telegram. And I've just had such a great time talking to all the Bitcoin OGs and early Ethereum people. And then as I'm starting to dig through things and find old Discord links and old Ethereum projects that people aren't thinking about, and just random contracts over on Etherscan, and bouncing those ideas with the community, like, hey, have you heard of this? Oh, well, have you heard of this? That's when I just really started to have fun. And so that's where, I really started to bring about and start to search for what I could, resurrect as my own, projects that I thought were really cool, but nobody was talking about. And, though what's interesting is in the background on back channels, a lot of us have been talking about a lot of projects that haven't surfaced until recently for a very long time. But it takes, and maybe it's the journalist in me, but as a journalist, I'm like, okay, well, let's write a great article that explains the story about, why they made this and what was important about it. Contact the devs, understand the smart contracts, understand what the possibilities could be for the community with some of these projects and these tokens. And so, yeah, that's really where I started to build out and figure out which projects I really wanted to write about and resurrect.
Speaking of this back channel, getting a little bit deeper into just kind of the heart of NFT archaeology, it's faced a lot of criticism. Some people, when you uncover a project, you're not certain of what the technology is, just kind of using the Terra Nullis thing, for example, right? Like it was a non-transferable token that was eventually wrapped and sold and maybe mislabeled, whether it was intentional or not. I guess we'll probably never really know. But a lot of these bring up important conversations, right? The idea of transferability, the idea of ownership, the idea of value. That if these controversial things that were brought back into light from NFT Archaeologist hadn't happened, then eventually that same situation would go down the road and maybe even more money would be lost. So are these like ethical questions considered with you or the deep concentrated individuals in the effort of reviving projects?
Yeah, they definitely are, at least in my circles. I can't speak for other discoveries and other people who've, brought other projects back to life. And I definitely can't speak for other OG project creators that have, either come back to the space or have been talking about their project the entire time and then suddenly get a lot of attention when the right, people talk about their project. So yeah, I can't speak to those, but there is a huge and long deliberation process going on behind the scenes before anyone publishes about these projects. You see the most thoughtful ones coming in, trying their best to get wide distribution if there are tokens available. You try to, to make all of the technology accessible as much as possible, so you don't just have to go to the contract and do a bunch of complicated things. And if you have to do all that, then having like a Twitter thread or something prepared to explain exactly how to interact with the contract, which is kind of, quote, giving away the game at that point. But that's why we prepare for so long before we publish about these projects. because once there's wide recognition of the project, it's kind of out of your control because it's the Ethereum blockchain for the most part. There's other other blockchains that deal with these too, but when it's like you're especially Ethereum, if you're dealing with these old smart contracts, no one can stop another person from interacting with the contract. So understanding when you should tell other people about it and having all of the details in place and then bringing those to light in a public way, kind of like what we did with EtherID is, okay, we got it. We have to move really fast on this because, we're in a situation where it's getting out of our back channel control of the smallest group of people all coming together, with an altruistic idea of how to get it to the community. And instead of that, it's like, oh, we got to move fast now because it's either getting in front of the community now with all the information we have available, or other people will make their own decisions that are completely out of our control. So that's when, like that night, I'm like, Jay, can we spin up, can we do an emergency? I know it's 11:30, but, we need to get this out here and we need to really, we're ready to publish. We want to go ahead and publish and we want to let people start, interacting with it responsibly with all the information in front of them. So, yeah, I haven't seen a real willy-nilly rediscovery yet where somebody is like, yo, did you know about this? And just like drops all the information out there. And sometimes I want to do that because I know about a lot of really cool projects. And sometimes I like to like drip out information about a project. If for example, if I'm not going to work on it, or if it's a project that is more historical than something that could be resurrected as a community, because there's different types of, NFTs out there. Speaking earlier, you're saying, I had resurrected 2 projects. I've actually resurrected 3 projects. But the third project, D-World, is not necessarily an quote apeable project. It's not a project where you're going to go in and everybody's going to collect a bunch of the tokens and then they're going to, they're going to trade a bunch of the tokens and they may not form a big community around it, but it's just a really cool historical fractionalized world map from early 2018. And what I loved about that project was doing the same research that I'd done for any project, even though I knew that project wasn't like a value play, as a lot of people, when they resurrect projects, they're always trying to figure out what's the value of the tokens, what's the value of the project. And, I'm not going to say that I don't think about that. I think about that a lot as well. But what's top of mind to me usually is getting the information in front of people, And so D-World was one of those projects. I knew when I published about D-World after working on it for like a year, after talking to Gary Vee about the project on DM and Twitter, after finally finding the dev after like 9 or 10 months of searching and trying to find some way of contacting the person. And then once I contacted them, getting them excited about doing something with the project. And then was it about 2 months ago or so now, the dev for D-World, who goes by Quasar, actually resurrected the original the website and like actually rebuilt it from scratch and rebuilt it because they understood the technology. I had rebought the domain name that the old website used to be on called dworld.io. I had bought that aftermarket from an individual because I thought it was really important that if they were going to resurrect it, for it to come back onto the original URL so that all the old Reddit posts and all the old Twitter like threads, all of that stuff would work again, even if the website was long gone. So yeah, it's a labor of love that a lot of different people touch on. It's not just me, there's so many others in the community that don't just think about the value play. They think about getting the historical information in front of people. And so, yeah, we have lots of differences and disagreements about, what things mean, whether things are NFTs or not, what the historical provenance of an NFT might be. But those are disagreements we generally handle very professionally. And most of the time we talk about it in public. We don't have those same arguments on back channels. Mm-hmm. We're not just sniping at each other on a DM. Like we'll put those conversations directly on Twitter, directly in the Discord, and we're going to let the public, as they see, what their decision is, they can see the information and they can side with us or not. But I do feel like even if we get kind of snippy sometimes with each other about the provenance, that we do tend to have those conversations in public so that we can have a meaningful, discussion with people who are really interested.
I think as a community now, doing this for about a year and a half since the Mooncats, since March 2021. There's a handful of blueprints that exist from reviving projects to now documenting timelines, documenting the culture, and then kind of categorizing everything as well, which didn't exist before. So there is always that underlying foundation where when you put something out into the public, we know that if the story is right and the heated debate of whether it's a token or not, the more projects that pop up there, yes, it dilutes the scarcity, but it adds to the story, it adds to the credibility. It shows that, you know, there wasn't just one person or two people building. Sometimes there might have been 5 people, but in different categories, which then they become the father or the pioneer of whatever that NFT classification may be. So it's quite interesting to see how it's all evolved since the beginning. But as a NFT archaeologist, as you mentioned, the journalistic properties of documenting and getting the story right is very important. What about the technical properties? As somebody who's not, we'll say as somebody who's not technically competent like myself, who's not a dev, but somebody who is maybe more of a journalist or maybe just more of a collector, what type of skills do you need to possess to then go in and maybe revive these projects? Is it something that you need to possess technically superior skills, or is it something that you can kind of figure out on your own?
Well, science is not an exact science. And so I would say there are 2 aspects to that, because while I am a technical person, I am not nearly as adept. I'm no shadowy super coder, you know? So as soon as I'm thinking that I've got a great handle on looking at Solidity and then going to Etherscan, Etherscan to look at contracts and digging out contracts manually through a combination of looking at Etherscan, looking at advanced Google searches, looking at advanced Reddit searches, looking at, Ethereum Stack Exchange, looking at people talking contemporaneously. And that's the culture part, looking at people talking about their projects, because people at the time they release their projects are excited about their projects. So they tend to talk about it. The most documentation you get is right when the projects are launching. So digging all that information up, are things that I felt pretty comfortable doing. Now, as soon as, EtherID is a good example, that EtherID comes out, there's a tweet from Matt, the guy who found the lineage, or he was like, well, I was inspired, and we had talked about in the EtherID, the EtherID dev references that he was improving the name reg that was currently out, and he was referring to the global registrar, but he wasn't specifically talking about the lineage contract that we talk about as much. He was talking about a version that came later that had few thousand registrations on it, and it was something that was being talked about in the community quite a bit. But then Matt, using his far superior to me skills, using a combination of AI and like bit tracing to actually use cryptography to look at unverified contracts, he was able to pull out information that I just way out of my league, just super out of my league. So I think that it goes both ways, because yes, like there's very, even though I was aware of the name reg contract that we call lineage now, like in my notes, I had it just pinned as 2015 name reg contract, unverified, come back to it, because I just couldn't do anything with it. And there were very few transactions on there too. So I just had no clue what it did, just to be honest. I just knew that it was being referenced by the one I was working on. So I was like, okay, well, we'll figure it out. And then so I've been able, without the highest technical level skills, I'm not super great at terminal. Like JavaScript is not my friend. Like I can get through those technical aspects, but they're not my go-tos. Because I'm more of a journalist, a product manager, product stack builder, and so yeah. Even though I didn't have that technical skill, I've been able to find and catalog an incredible amount of incredible projects. And I found even more that, haven't been exposed now. And on the back channels, we still talk about other ones that will eventually be resurrected. Whereas it is so nice to have that skill set where you can just spin up a wrapper, spin up, an AI, module to start digging through the blockchain. Like if I had that extra skill set, then I would probably do things a little differently. But since I don't, it comes back to the community side, where you go and find people that you can combine forces with that, that have the technical skill, but maybe not the journalism skill, or people that are really good at digging, but don't know how to build, back-end website APIs. And then combining the interest of those parts of the community together, and that's what really makes these things possible. Even at this point, without a little help from my friends, I wouldn't have been able to make EtherID happen. I wouldn't have been able to make Immortal Player Characters happen. And I certainly wouldn't have been able to make D-World happen because the original dev is the one who really made that happen. So yeah. Oh yeah. Immortal Player Characters. Love it. Such a fun project.
This was a unique one. And before we dive into this a little bit, give us a little alpha. Tell me how many pre-ERC 721 contracts do you think have the ability to be revived? And I mentioned that because that's kind of been an agreed upon value amplifier within the historical NFT community, at least on Ethereum. What do you think between 2015 or I guess it'd be August 2015 to March 2018?
Man, between those two dates, there are probably 100+ cool contracts that people aren't really talking about. There are probably less than 50 that are super viable that I'm currently aware of, but that doesn't really play into the full measure of what could be out there, because even Immortal Player Characters is a great, even Immortal Player Characters is a great example, because that's a contract that's still unverified. And so, yeah, it was a combination of finding things. Yeah, Immortal Player Characters March 2018, CryptoPunks June 2017. And IPC, even though it's pre-ERC 721 standardization, the dev themselves were fully aware of what was going on with, the 721 standard development, and implemented 721 as a standard into their contract, even though it's not a standard implementation. And we get super wonky into that. Same thing as, CryptoPunks is technically an ERC 20.
Yep.
So yeah, that's another thing. It's just very interesting when you know the facts about where things came from and what it actually means. Is there's a lot out there that, CryptoPunks and this kind of staying on that thing of viability. There are probably other character or art related contracts out there on Ethereum that are technically ERC 20s. Even the very first experiment with IPC was an ERC 20. That's something, there's a little alpha for you, because that's a contract that no one has still really messed with. In theory, the first 5 Immortal Player Characters were minted around January 2018 as ERC 20s on a completely different contract. So yeah, I mean, the entirety of going down and trying to find these things, it does come down to how many are, like, what is viable. And so for this one, I felt it was super viable because I originally found it on Etherscan, just digging around. I found an unverified contract with a lot of transactions on it that was called Immortal Player Characters. And then I went over and started digging around it like I usually do into the Wayback Machine on archive.org and trying to find information about Immortal Player Characters. Turns out there was a version of the contract, or not a version of the contract, the version of the website for Immortal Player Characters that the devs still had live at the time. You could go to a certain buy page, you could pay with PayPal, and he would send you a physical paper wallet NFT that contained the actual ERC 721 character on an Ethereum paper wallet. I mean, just incredible. And then it turned out beyond that, I started, because I didn't get so I made an order for like 5 of these cards, right? And I didn't hear anything back for like 2 weeks. So then I send an email to the contact email, just wondering if the site is really still alive or if this is really happening or not. And then I get an email back from Ed Annunziata, and he's like, hey, yeah, just make sure to give me your address and I'll get them sent out. And then he sends them out. And then I'm like looking up Ed Annunziata, and I'm like, wait, Ed Annunziata is the guy that created Echo the Dolphin for Sega Genesis. He's the guy who was the lead designer for Spider-Man, Spider-Man 2, X-Men, X-Men 2, Jurassic Park, so many other really cool Sega Genesis games. And he has an NFT project. And so, yeah, it was just mind-blowing. Yeah, this is reflective of my, if you're looking at the screen part, showing my Medium article I posted. And, I worked on that Medium article for about 6 months before I ended up publishing it, because I was very focused on talking about Immortal Player Character in real life at various events, like at my conference in February called NFTATL. I talked about it there and did like a historical NFT like section to my conference there. And then I went and spoke at VCon and at the boardroom bleachers and did a talk about Immortal Player Characters there. And then I met with Ed at NFT NYC, and I actually got to meet him in real life. And he gave me another stack of paper wallets to hand out and give away to people. And yeah, and then we finally, as soon as I got back, I like got to publish. It's time to put this out there. And I had some great support from Black Star from the NFT Relics Discord. Yeah, you can't see, if you're listening, you can't see it, but I'm just going to describe real quick. There's a metaverse of pixel characters that are essentially NPCs. When you're not in control of your Immortal Player character, they act as non-player characters inside of this instance of this world called IPC City. And that was released back in 2018. So just the amount of cool things that this project had put together, it was just mind-blowing to me. And it was mind-blowing to me that nobody had really done much with it. Because in the NFT archaeology community, we're always looking for just things that are cool. And this is just cool. It's a game with pixel art that is open source pixel art, with an AR-based app, with paper wallets, with 2,800 or so that had been minted originally, but the contract went up to 12K. So there was another like 9,000 plus that could be minted, still in a similar way to the Mooncats. And I don't know, just so many cool things. It's the type that gets you very excited, and it's, as a person, who is a journalist and really likes to tell stories and learn about the lore of things. This project just really just got me just pumped up and really like wanting to talk about all the different facets of this amazing project. So yeah, I mean, shout out to the whole community too for supporting me on the back channels while I got this ready to publish. Because yeah, when we did publish, we hit in the 24 hours after we published, the project hit number one on OpenSea in the 24-hour window of accounting, for how much sales have been going on it. And at the time that we did that, we hadn't connected the custom API to OpenSea yet, and all of the images were just question marks. It was 100% question marks trading on the number one slot on OpenSea.
Past the punks, past the apes. That was pure chaos when that happened, but man, what a fun experience. And one of my favorite parts of NFT archaeology isn't necessarily finding the projects, it's the renewed interest that surfaced across the NFT community. And then of course you have to combat misinformation. I remember when it hit number one, there's people saying that predated CryptoPunks. Of course it does not. But then every single time this happens, whether you believe it's historical or not, between crypto skulls or puny codes or IPC or EtherID or Linagi, it always brings more people to the space every single time. Of course, it comes with criticism, which is well understood as well, but that's what I love, is because every time it's just people find something fascinating about the project, whether it's IPCs, interoperable players that are supposed to be used for multiple games, right? One of the early versions of that, similar to like kind of Saratobi with interoperable skins, to the Linagi contract that has the original creator or the person who duplicated the contract, however you see it, ends up changing the name at the time, right? Just keeps adding that energy and renewed interest. Of course, with Linagi, and maybe we'll talk about it later, gets more criticism. And one thing I've noticed as I've been creating the NFT archaeology calendar is that once we got into 2022, every project faces more scrutiny, more controversial topics. But you know why? It's because it means there's more people in the space, which just means that it's very, very rewarding at the time. So before we move on to EtherID, because I know that's a big one, I know people want to hear about that. What was it like reaching out to Ed? And also for you as an NFT archaeologist, do you get this rewarding feeling of giving a second chance or second opportunity to an NFT founder who maybe was too early for the time, or maybe the project just wasn't right, completely technically, culturally, or whatever it was, bringing this project to them and saying, hey, there's a community and there's a possibility at a second chance?
Absolutely. Like with Ed specifically, Ed is a character. I love Ed. He's an interesting person. He does not play by the rules. He does what he wants. He's the type of, NFT founder and the type of video game proprietor that is just going to go his own way, which is why he was focused on making Immortal Player Characters in, late 2017 into early 2018 when he actually created the project, was because he wanted to be an innovator. He doesn't like the idea of flipping. He doesn't even really like the idea of OpenSea. What he likes the idea of is Ethereum smart contracts and innovating and creating interesting things. And yeah, that's just like what was really cool in talking to him is I could tell that he was a very, very thoughtful, technical founder. That's what he really amounted to. And he had actually been, even if you went to his Twitter before we published, he would talk about Immortal Player Characters from time to time. And he would be like, hey, did you know that I made this project and it's going to be out here, forever? They're immortal. They're going to be on the Ethereum blockchain forever. And when he would talk about that, then most of his audience are non-NFT people, so they would be like, Ed, please stop talking about NFTs, or they'd be like, Ed, just please talk about Echo the Dolphin, talk about all the great stuff that's already been proven that you've done. And so when Immortal Player Characters did publish, and it was a wild week too, because we published, and then within like 24 hours, I was on an off the grid camping trip for the next week. And so, my partner at the time, she was not super pleased with the amount of time that I was spending on Discord and Twitter when I was in this off the grid kind of status where I wasn't supposed to be on my phone really for like a week. But yeah, it just took that, because translating the project to the current NFT world, it is something that you have to kind of like stay on top of, So Ed, he was like, I don't want to do OpenSea, just to be honest. I want you to trade over on the original IPC marketplace. I was like, fair. But, people in general didn't even understand what that is. And, educating them on the value of staying over on the IPC marketplace versus them wanting to be able to see the images of their characters in their wallets, which at the time was still question marks because we didn't have the custom API set up. It's something that I had to translate not only to the community, but over to Ed, and Ed, he was fairly resistant to, quote, playing ball with what the people in the community were asking for, which, were fairly common things to us, to tell, to limit the digital mints, to get the royalty set up for himself on OpenSea, which he didn't want to do either. He wanted to just leave it at 0. To get the images up on the OpenSea side so that you could see them there, because you could already see them on the IPC marketplace, and you could get your paper wallets you could still see, but when it came to to things that people felt were important about NFT projects, he wanted to go his own way, and shout out to him for that, for holding it to his guns about the way that he wanted to do things. And that does tie in directly to where we'll go here in a second with EtherID too. It's a much different interaction with the dev in that one.
Yeah, EtherID, as I close this out, and I showed this picture of you at VCon, which you did secretly, which was probably about a month before you actually unveiled this Medium post. So yeah. Truly a story within its own of the rediscovery and Ed's and IPC's story. So, but moving on to EtherID, at the time, as you mentioned previously in this conversation, that you had come to me. It was a Friday or a Saturday, I don't remember, and you sounded very rushed. And I was like, hey, we need to get this out there. We need to get the information. And I was like, what's going on? They're like, we're going to release this project from 2015 and then 2016 with the 2 different versions. And I was just like, all right, fire me up, because you realize that because of the blockchain's transparency, that somebody else, there's people who, for those that don't know, there's people who watch blockchain activity. If you get enough minting and activity happening, then bots start picking it up. And at that point, then once it starts reaching the charts, then it's out there and there's no way to kind of protect it. So we, as you can even see here, it shows 2:05 a.m., which is funny. We had this Twitter Spaces and we talked about it. And this was the first 2015 project rediscovery since Ethereum, I believe at the time, which was 2 days or a day after Mooncats. So 2015 projects, I'm sure you know the real number, but very, very, very scarce. Maybe this one has a little bit more tokens, but just take us again through a little bit of revision through your own mind of how you first came across this project. What were the thoughts and kind of what was the excavation process to get this prepared and ready to post through Twitter Spaces, the Medium posts, and Twitter?
Absolutely. One other thing I just noticed that I think is cool is I see that there's an Ethereum sign beside of my my cool cat instead of the the shape, the other shape. Like was it a hexagon?
Yeah,
I never noticed like that. Is that new?
it's through NFT Inspect. It's like the Twitter social media engagement thing for NFT. It's only for NFT people, so I think that's picked up by like a machine learning bot.
Nice. Well, cool. So with EtherID, just an incredible story for mine too. Okay. So the first thing I found was the original unverified contract that was launched on November 28th of 2015. And then the way I found that was by digging around on Reddit, looking for early NFT related posts. And what I was actually looking for is they never used the term NFT then. There's a lot of the jargon that we use today that was not used at the time. So you're looking for terms like Ether, you're looking for terms like token or domain, deed. That's a good one, that people used a lot then. And so you're also looking for standards, you're looking for certain types of code that is common, across various, setups. And so when I found EtherID, it was through a combination of Reddit posts and through Etherscan. And so I found it, and I found this one a while back. But again, at the time, I shelved it temporarily because I was working on some other projects. Well, then I came back to it because I wanted to just do a deep dive and document any reference to the project that I could find. And what I was so happy to do is to find that there were a lot of references and a lot of documentation, not only about the project, but about the dev themselves. And so, EtherID was launched by a dev named Alex on November 29th, 2015. And his idea when he posted it on Reddit was EtherID, Ethereum name registrar as it should be. And so when I heard as it should be, I'm like, dude, this is like early 2015. What possibly could he mean by as it should be? Because this to me is the earliest thing I've ever heard of. So then I started looking through his documentation, and he mentions, because I found his GitHub, which his GitHub has a lot of great documentation as well, that there was a name reg contract that had been floating around, the one that, we eventually, is part of the global registrar contracts that are floating around mostly off the blockchain. Yeah, shout out to Alex Na. So it had been floating around, but he wasn't super satisfied with the way they were developing. And this is far pre-ENS. ENS was in co-development as well, through a lot of people from Ethereum Foundation. So then the things he didn't like about it were that the tokens did not expire in any way. So then that meant that if you owned the capital J, capital L as your domain, JL, right? If you lost the key to your, this is a good reference to it right here. If you lost the key to your wallet, then the name would be lost forever. Yeah, and this is really good. Piper Merriman, who's part of the Ethereum Foundation, he said, back up what you mean by as it should be, or please rename the post something else. And yeah, Alex specifically, thankfully all this, this is still just existing on Reddit as well, so that you can just look at it yourself. But Alex, the dev, he said, well, the existing name reg service and other suggesting services all have the name erosion problem if they don't answer what happens if the owner loses their key. So in which case the registered name is lost for everybody forever. And then the other thing is he wasn't content with the buying and selling idea or the transferring of the names. He didn't think that was well thought out enough. So then he created EtherID, and he did this completely solo. He's a solo dev working within the community. Still, he's talking on Ethereum Stack Overflow. He's talking on Reddit. And everybody's. This is very early, so you got a lot of Ethereum Foundation people that he's chatting with about this, and he's actually commenting on the official Ethereum name registrar, pages, and so other people are advocating for EtherID to be the official name registrar, and all these other things are happening all at the time. But then something really incredible happened, and that was on June 16th, 2016, the DAO hack occurred. And the DAO hack split the Ethereum community, and eventually we know that Ethereum forked and became Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. Well, at that time, it was noted by the developer that the same exploit that was used in the DAO hack could potentially exploit the EtherID contract that was originally deployed. So the dev jumped in. He modified the contract. He actually upgraded it slightly, so he got rid of the zero domain, which was another issue that they had found out that they had. And then once he did that, he created the final EtherID contract, deployed that, I believe, June 26th, 2016. And then once he deployed that one, then he verified that contract. And what he did in verifying it too is he showed that he had the first that I've found so far, migration code baked into the contract. And if you'll scroll just a little further, you can see that too. That special code allowed the contract owner to assign a domain directly to the original owner from the old contract. So if the message sender, which is the contract owner, I'm just reading straight. If the message sender is the contract owner and the number of domains registered is less than 32,301, which is the number of domains that were registered when he took the snapshot of the original contract, and the transfer address is not equal to 0, which means that you have to put something in the transfer address. Well, then the other clause in here says, then if there is something in the transfer address, which there has to be, then whatever that transfer address is, make that person in the transfer address the owner of the domain when they mint it. So then it says immediately transfer ownership to the old owner. So that piece of code ensured that he was able, as the contract owner, to, in its own primitive way, migrate the tokens that had already been minted, the 32,301, that was the top limit he was allowed to transfer, over to the new contract with the original ownership intact. So yeah, just an incredible. Just I've never seen any code like that in a smart contract. I've still to this day never seen another similar way of doing a migration. Migrations these days happen a lot of different ways, and that's something else I've been preparing another article about, is about the history of migrations, because you've got EtherID that was migrated all the way back in 2016. You've got you got ENS that was migrated by killing their own old contracts from 2017 all the way to 2019. So their contract migration mainly happened in 2019. You've got Joy World, which I don't know if you're familiar with Joy World, but Joy World's original contract was a hot potato, which means that every time that you bought a token, the price was automatically set in the contract to a higher price, and that you couldn't set the tokens to not be for sale. So then eventually John Orion Young, the guy who created Joy World, he migrated all of the Joy World tokens out of that contract into a new contract, and he did it in from what I understand, in a very non-code based way. It's like, hey, send me your token number 1, and I'll send you the new token number 1 in its place directly from my contract. The final one that is more modern that I'm really thinking about is Ghosts. And Ghosts is an incredible project created by Gong Yang, who is an Anon artist who really blew up during the 2021 bull run for doing one-of-one digital art of these interesting ghosts and demons, and eventually went past that. But the original thing, when we were all vibing in the Discord with Dingaling and Franklin and like so many other people were a part of the Ghosts run up, that they were all being minted on a ninja drop. You never knew when he was going to drop one, so you just could not sleep. You just had to stay in the Discord constantly. And then he would drop them onto the OpenSea contract because he was an artist and he loved making it, but he wasn't super technical. He didn't have a huge technical team. So he actually just dropped all of the ghosts and demons onto the OpenSea contract that you can just mint. You can mint your own tokens on, but you don't own your own personal contract. So then within the last 6 months or so, or 6 or 8 months, he decided to, he's much more sophisticated now. He's done well as an artist to spin up his own ERC 721 contract and migrate those tokens over to the new contract. So yeah, the history of migration just in this project and in so many other projects is really fascinating, and it's a part of EtherID that is a really like interesting part of the story.
Yeah, and I know EtherID has a few of the first or really pioneered a handful of methods and implementations, but just for preference, especially for those who maybe are unaware of what migrations are, but maybe are more familiar with airdrops that were pioneered probably by CryptoPunks, could have had before. Are those technically the same things? Would you say that this migration is kind of the precursor to what the airdrops, which is a common migration method now?
Yeah, you know what's really interesting, and yeah, I do agree. It is a form of migration, but the way the CryptoPunks were airdropped versus the way that this is migrated, there's a pretty like clear difference there. Where this one he used code. So, a combination of code and a snapshot to transfer them manually as the dev from one contract to the other. Things like, from what I understand, with like CryptoPunks, it was more of a social consensus along with using the contract, where they're like, hey, we took a snapshot of the owners of these CryptoPunks at this date and time, and we're airdropping you the official token within the fixed contract, as a replacement for your buggy one that we're not going to support anymore. Basically like almost like a software upgrade. So yeah, I think that it's really interesting, and I think it's a precursor to the way that CryptoPunks, and Joy World and Ghosts and ENS in its own way as well. I think that those differences.
Yeah, especially with CryptoPunks too, because the bug happened with the marketplace. So the individuals could buy a CryptoPunk and then get their money back in return, which I just had on Hemba, who was the person who exploited that pretty rigorously, which is quite funny. I have here posted up the EtherID V1 bugs. Just for a little bit of preface, so you don't have to go too deep into it. At the bottom there's some comments by a community member who, upon the release of this, you had mentioned that there was a bug in V1. He took it under his own accord. He said that he vetted it. He's somebody who's also been on the podcast and has revived projects, so he definitely has pretty elite technical skills. He went on his own jurisdiction. He took the chance, and he went and he claimed about 70 to 75%, number might be off a little bit, of the V1 tokens. And to this day, it hasn't had any issues yet. But here there's some V1s, and of course the dev migrated it with concerns of some of the bugs. So could you go into some detail of what the issue may have been?
Yeah, first off, the same issue with the CryptoPunks marketplace is, what was going on with this bug too, the unchecked send bug, which means that you could send the money towards the contract, and then instead of receiving what you think you're going to receive, you wouldn't receive it. So that was a very similar bug in V1. There's also, there's a very specific like rundown. Yeah, you don't have to take my word for it. The dev himself, mentioned the unchecked send bug. He also mentioned that there's the zero function bug that was causing a problem because the domain known as zero is supposed to signal the end of the linked list that verifies which EtherIDs came in what order, because it's a linked list database. So as soon as you created an EtherID, it's always locked in as being like number 5. And the way that works is the linked list actually reads what was the EtherID before this, and then when the next one is made, it's like this is the one that came after that one. So it's a chain of it's a database that's created in a chain. And so the fact that you could mint domain 0 was causing an error also in the contract, because 0 is supposed to indicate the end of the list, but because someone owned it, anytime that they were running a change domain function using that domain, it was causing a problem with the list. So that was one of the problems that they eliminated. Just anecdotally, the dev told me that when he went to deploy the first contract, he downloaded the code and then, and messed with it a little more and then deployed it. And he deployed 2 different versions almost simultaneously, and one's never really been touched at all. And when he did that, though, he's not exactly certain if he changed anything else, like if he fixed any other bugs on the desktop, before he deployed it. And so with it being unverified at this point too, we're not exactly sure if there's anything else slightly different. I doubt it's anything super major difference, but definitely some differences. So yeah, and then that is the other nature of what I spoke to earlier, is that you work in back channels to figure these things out. And I was working with another really awesome person who was finishing the wrapper contract when we were wanting to get this out, and we wanted a second set of eyes on the wrapper contract. So I reached out to somebody in the community that is well known for bringing up some other big projects. I had personally noticed that this person had created wrapper contracts in the past that seemed to be functional as well. So yeah, I reached out to them, and unfortunately, like I said, with the nature of the Ethereum blockchain, we didn't sign like an NDA, nothing like that. We probably should have. Going forward, a lesson learned, right? I'll have a lot of people signing NDAs when I work on these projects. But they decided to take their own actions based on their interpretation of what we were saying. And, it was something that really changed our timeline. That Saturday that we launched, and that I asked, for you to help with the emergency Twitter space that night, I missed a pretty important wedding of one of my friends. Completely just had to not attend his wedding because I had to work on this. Yeah. And so, yeah. And at the time too, we did not know who was messing with the other contract. And even though we approached the particular people we're talking about individually, directly, hey, do you know what's going on? We were told oh, no idea what's going on, man. Can't tell you. It's like, okay, cool. So then I can't, I'm going to take your word for it, and I'm going to keep on, moving as if I, trying to get this done, which, thankfully we got it done. We got in front of the community, and yeah, I'm very, very happy where we're going with it right now.
Yeah, if I believe the V2 distribution is actually pretty fair, and shout out to Puny Codes for kind of being the community that, or one of the communities that helped with the fair distribution, because it is unfortunate that a handful of the historic collections were pretty much botted by one or a handful of individuals, which just completely kills any momentum for the community. But as moving into the next section of this Medium post, let's talk a little bit about the innovations outside of what you had mentioned earlier, where they made updates to the global register, and talking with the Ethereum Foundation. And then we'll dive into how the hell do I buy some of these things. So tell me what else is unique to EtherID.
Yeah, so what is super cool about EtherID is that it has traits that are assignable. And what I mean by that is, let's stay with J uppercase L JL, or let's go with test, because that's the example in this version. If you had test as your domain, you don't just have a domain name that is just sitting there, that is just collectible. It's when this was created, it was never really thought of as being a quote collectible. It was thought of as being something you could use to decentralize the web and to disrupt this whole idea that the .coms rule everything. And that was the real process and thought process with this. This is an Ethereum project. We're trying to innovate and disrupt the old way of doing things. So the dev was really specific when he created this to make a certain facets of it useful, right? So then the example here with test isn't just a domain. It also has these trait functionalities, including what the field they call here contact and message. And contact and message translate to in the contract as name and ID. And so what you can do is you can assign the name or description in the name in the where it says contact field here. You can assign whatever you want there, a string value into that area. So in this example, the dev used his own Twitter handle under the contact area, and under the message area, he put test message. But what is super cool is that you don't have to put just test message here. And he decided to start innovating very closely after that. He figured out a way that you can put an IPFS hash in where the message field is at, which comes across as value. The term is called value on the function. And so you can assign that. And then right after that, he built out a way to use these domains all the way back in early 2016. This was deployed between January and April is when he was working on this part of the project in 2016. And so in April into March, I believe, of 2016, he deployed a way to actually make these domains usable. So what you can do is you can create, you can upload a website to IPFS, like a simple website, which means you get the HTML index.html file, the JavaScript, whatever, you put it into a folder, you upload that folder to IPFS, and that folder then turns into an IPFS hash, which is a number. That number you can assign to your test domain. And then he had two different ways of interacting with it offhand. First was through the Mist browser, which is the Ethereum default browser that was supposed to be really huge. It's had its own issues since then. And then he created this is great. He created a Chrome extension that also allowed you to use these IPFS hashes to resolve these websites or art or code or whatever you wanted to resolve in your Chrome browser. So yeah, it's very highly technical the way that he built it. And that's one thing that we don't get the benefit of is like being able to fully translate his technical talk about how this all works for an easy interaction with an easy audience. He's like, because even when I spoke to him, he's like, yeah, you just spin up your Geth node and then you just jump into a terminal and just start, uploading things through the IPFS, daemon. And once you've got your IPFS daemon working, you've got your peer-to-peer websites. And I'm like, that sounds so easy that I don't know what you're even talking about, but I know, but I'm going to figure it out. and so this is what I've been working on as of late. Is now that we have the community around EtherID thinking about what to do with these EtherIDs, is to show them what you can do with them. Which what's cool about this thing you're showing here is it's on the very highest technical level. It shows how to create a decentralized website using your domains. But like I said, again, even if you read through this, it's not going to, for a normie or for a non-technical person, it's not going to make any sense. It also works a little differently than the way he documented it, because you can't even run a local Geth anymore without a beacon node, so that you can contact the proof of stake version of Ethereum. So you can't do that. Most people aren't going to use a local IPFS daemon anymore because they're going to use services that are created around it, like NFT.storage or something like that. They're going to use that instead of spinning up their own node and serving the files locally onto IPFS. So yeah, you get into these super, super technical things. But what we've been doing, and this is where our focus has been now, is taking this cool utilities of an EtherID and actually executing against that to make the utility a reality. Because yes, it is technically possible to do all these things. No, it is not easy yet. So that's what we've been working on, is making it easy.
Yeah, you guys have took a lot of work in, and I know there's been a ton of recent sales. Tell me a little bit about the supply and rarity. How as a collector do I value these things? Has there been community consensus that's conformed yet over one of the, we'll say, quote unquote, clubs, which you see that exist within ENS? Has any of these formed on EtherID yet?
So I can only speak to this with given the community feedback, because the value play, how you value these things, that's not really where I keep most of my focus. I keep a lot of my focus on the technology itself, making it accessible, understanding what you can do with it, creating utility. But I'll tell you this, people love the single double, 2-digit, 3-digit, characters. They love the ASCII art that people have discovered that has been intentionally minted. Like, yeah, this is a good example. It's definitely a person. It's definitely a face with rosy cheeks and their hands out, right? This is not a random thing. This is art. And it was created on a 1/22/16 on the V1 contract, and then migrated to the verified contract. And so, yeah, when you see these things, you know that someone created this intentionally as art. And so there is an interesting, group of people like that are really, into the ASCII art side of it. They're into digits, whether it's as a digital identity play or it's just as, the idea of collectability and the idea of completionism. There's a certain thing of wanting to have them all out there. There are really cool old ones. There's the very basic human nature ones, like the word sex. There's even a funny reference to the dev asking, "Hey, did you?" Somebody's like, "Did you reserve a bunch of these?" And the dev's like, "Yeah, I reserved about 500, just to kind of get it started." And the guy was like, "Did you reserve sex?" And he's like, "Of course." So I mean, there's this whole human nature thing too of certain words that have certain, meaning a certain punch to people. But the clubs, quote unquote, that I think are forming are really around what people already really value, which is the first 10,000 EtherIDs that were created, the quote alpha EtherIDs that were created, which is the first 1119, I think is the number. 1119 or so EtherIDs were created by the developer on those first couple of days. And technically it was probably all one day because he was in Canada, but we do UTC time, so it crossed over from 2 days based on UTC time. So yeah, the other clubs that are really developing are around dictionary words, other types of art, emojis. People love emojis. And then there's the underlying tech people that want to do something with their EtherIDs. So they're starting to like grab ones that have to do with brands that they find important. Because, if your brand wants to be, Billy Bob in this example, if your brand wants to be Billy Bob, then you need to have, your domain name essentially. And if you are a traditional .com person, you want billybob.com. Well, billybob.com is probably very, very hard to obtain. And so we're literally generations younger than the people who were obsessed with .com names and squatting on .com names. So that's why, in our world, we like .xyz, we like all the other top level domains that are floating around there. We like the idea of not having to have a suffix. We like .ens, we like .og. We like to go our own way, And so what's really cool about EtherID is you can just be Billy Bob's. Like if you thought getting billybob.com was cool, then awesome. If you think billybob.eth is cool, I'm with you. That is a really cool one. But what about just Billy Bob? What if you could go into your browser, type Billy Bob, and get to Billy's Bob Emporium of Southeast Asia and, and buy all of his wares or collect his art or view his blog? There's some really cool methods and things that you can do with these. And so, yeah, that's basically where the communities and the different aspects of communities have really been growing in my regard to it.
And to show what this actually means, as I typed in Billy Bob, it says owner 0x0000. Does that mean nobody owns this?
That's right. Billy, all lowercase, Billy space Bob. No one on EtherID has claimed that particular title yet.
And how much does it cost to mint? I'm not going to mint it, but if I clicked it, it looks like right now it's about $5. Does that sound right? $5 in gas? Until recently, it was costing maybe about 50 cents in gas. So, gas is kind of fluctuating at the moment. But yeah, it just costs the price of gas and then the price, of the amount of characters that you're registering. So if you were to register a very, very long EtherID, you would be putting more information on the blockchain than if you were to put just the word, Bob, for example, right? So then it costs a little bit more in gas. Yeah,
The timeline.
the updated timeline. You can see it is the third on the timeline. You have the Lenaji name register. Technically, you probably have a few of the global registers that have minted a few. That's the first one. Then you have Ethereum, the handful of versions there, and then EtherID version 1, version 2, and who knows what else exists out there. Jeremiah, before we get out of here, though, tell us about the wrapper, right? I'm a tech simp. I have no idea how to navigate this. I purchased a few. To me, it's a pain in the ass. I just want to be able to buy it on OpenSea. What's the timeline for it, and how will it affect the project?
So very, very soon, the wrapper itself, the code is done. We've just been doing a lot of our due diligence in the background to try to make sure that we've thought of everything, and to also try to give as much functionality through the wrapper, through pass-throughs as possible, because it's important to us that these aren't just thought of as collectibles, right? So then if we just did a base wrapper that just allowed you to own the name wrapped as a 721, that's cool. And that's, that's valid. But what we really, where my focus is at, it's on the utility, right? So then we're trying to make sure that as many functions as possible, including your change ID, where you can assign that IPFS hash, we want to make those functions passable through the contract on the wrapper. So that's why, we've been doing our due diligence. We actually just recently started working on the StealthNet to, do the StealthNet version of the deployment, which is shout out to Nameless, for having that StealthNet, that we can do a full test of what could really happen and simulate a lot of things. So, we're hoping that our wrapper does everything, that we want it to do perfectly, and that some, mega brain with a flashbot, minions won't figure something out that we didn't think of. Because it's always possible, but we feel like is that we're going to, we're taking our time to make sure that we've thought through as much of that as we can. Aging in place. Yeah.
You can see, I'm looking through the recent sales, and a lot of 3 and 4 digits. And then you have some, so you can see there's one of them down here that I had purchased. And this is similar too with the case sensitivity. So it gives a little more optionality. Maybe it causes more confusion down in the future, but I'm excited to see where this goes. Do you think playing forward, you guys are going to add an extension at the end, like a .og, which doesn't exist yet, or a .eth? Has there been any conversation about that? Because I know some people have a preference for it.
Yeah. In all honesty, our conversations have really been more about creating a suffix. Because it makes more sense for EtherID to be suffixed prefixed instead of suffixed. And so that's really where our thought process has been, because I felt like the nature of the project, if you own test, that you should be able to just type test into your browser, And so we've been playing around with a couple prefix, additions that we could use with a plugin, so that you could turn your Chrome browser into an EtherID browser. And so that's the thought process right now. So then I will tell you this, we're community led, I'm very much on the technical side. I'm very much on the journalism side. So we are going to put it out to the community. And if a suffix is something that, is valued a lot with the community, we'll definitely listen to that feedback, because just in all honesty, this is an open source project. And if people want to really dive into suffixes, with their community, more power to them. One thing I definitely want to mention with suffixes and EtherID that is amazing and is something that is of note is if the community decided that, say, .eid was what they wanted the suffix to be, right? And maybe they'll think of something cooler. But let's, say .eid. You could technically go through and just start registering 1.eid, 2.eid, 3.eid over on EtherID, and not even have to get our permission to have this thing that resolves in that way. But what would still be the net effect, because of what we're building to make it interactive, is 1.eid would be a community, maybe even to itself. And that community could grow as large as it wants to with the tools that we're enabling.
Man, y'all are too gigabrain for me, man. This all sounds exciting. I'll have to see it once it's on paper, transform. But the idea of open source, open community projects has existed for some time, but becoming more prevalent in the historical NFT community because of all of the resurrections that have happened. So completely beautiful. We're all part of this lavish experiment of the decentralized world, trapped inside the niche of historical NFT until we build utility and prove that we're nobody to be messed with. So Jeremiah, thank you for first all of your service and all of the work that you've put in. You know, three projects is no easy feat, which only a handful of people have actually done in the community, and that you're going to take it on and put more out there so that you could keep us all interested, enlightened, and something to argue about over time. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And be looking out. There's a lot more on the blockchain that's still to come.
I appreciate that. Thank you guys for listening and watching. We'll catch you next time.